Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. Let me give you a few instructions about webinar logistics. Your lines have been put on mute and will be kept on mute throughout the duration of the webinar. But if we move to a Q&A session where we need live questions and answers, you can always hit *7 to unmute your line, but *6 to keep it muted again. We also will be using the discussion Q&A box, so as we go through the webinar, if you have any questions or comments, you can go ahead and type them there, and we will go ahead and answer them as the opportunity arises. We have multiple presenters on this webinar who will be meeting in just a moment. But first, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Maggie Osborne, and I am the Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer for United Philanthropy Forum. For those of you who are not as familiar with the United Philanthropy Forum, I'd like to show you what our network looks like and the new forum. For our first 18 years of existence, we're 33 regional associations of grant makers from around the country who are represented on this map, but we now also include an additional 32 national philanthropy serving organizations, and they are different types of organizations that are either issue-focused, identity-focused, by type of foundation or group, or by practice within philanthropy. So as you look at this map, it illustrates that we are the largest network representing philanthropy with well over 8,000 foundations represented in the network. We are working hard to work better together for deeper impact with our members and to make connections throughout the entire philanthropic network. So we're very pleased today to be partnering with one of our members, Fund the People, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this webinar over to Yolanda Calderon-Durant, and she will take it from here, overviewing the agenda. So Yolanda, it's all yours. And please remember to *7 to unmute your line as you're speaking.
Thank you, Maggie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. On behalf of Fund the People, I'm pleased to be with you all on today's webinar. In today's webinar, we will talk about what talent investing is, why it's needed. Then we'll hear from the Kresge Foundation and learn about their Talent and Leadership Development Program. Then we'll hear from Community Wealth Partners who helped to launch the Talent and Leadership Development Program. And then we'll hear directly from a Kresge Foundation partner, CDAD, Community Development Associates of Detroit, about the impact that the Talent and Leadership Development Program has had on their work, their organization, and their staff. And then we'll pause for Q&A and next steps. In today's webinar, we will learn what it looks like to concretely invest in talent development. We'll also learn about the types of interventions that are available, specifically the work that the Kresge Foundation has done in this area. We'll learn about what works and also what we're learning with the Talent and Leadership Development Program in particular. So Fund the People is a campaign to maximize investment in the nonprofit workforce. We focus our work primarily on foundations to create a supply for supporting nonprofit talent, and we focus on nonprofits to create a demand for this type of funding assistance. So Fund the People's vision is that with increased attention and investment in nonprofit talent, we envision a powerful and inclusive nonprofit workforce. These investments will lead to high-performing, high-impact, and highly sustainable teams, organizations, and movements. Fund the People carries out its work with a three-part strategy. First, we make the case. We work to influence the attitudes of funders and nonprofits by making a compelling case for investing in nonprofit talent. Secondly, we equip for action. We design and share practical tools, promising practices, data, trainings, and other resources to empower funders and nonprofits to bake in talent investing into their strategies, attitudes, and practices. And third, we work to build a movement. We seek to build a critical mass of champions and adopters of talent investing who treat and value nonprofit professionals as the most important asset in the social sector. We believe that the nonprofit people, specifically staff, board members, and volunteers, are the sector's most valuable asset. In fact, the nonprofit workforce represents almost 11% of the U.S. economy, or more specifically, 11 million people. And a really important example of the impact that nonprofits have in our country is that, according to the Alliance for Strong Families and Communities, the human services sector impacts the lives of 1 in every 5 Americans. So supporting the nonprofit workforce is critically important given that community needs have significantly increased and resources are diminishing, particularly for social service and social justice groups in this challenging era. When discussing this topic, it's important to provide a clear definition of what talent investing is. So talent investing is the intentional deployment of resources to support and develop professionals and leaders in the nonprofit workforce. You can find this definition in our Glossary of Terms that's included in our free toolkit. So we believe that supporting the talent needs of nonprofit staff and entire organizations leads to improved performance. This type of support helps to counter the current deficit in investment in leadership and talent development and will help clear the current leadership and talent bottleneck in the sector. It's essential that funders and nonprofit leaders and executive directors have honest conversations to develop plans for talent investment and prepare for executive transitions. Investing in talent transforms organizational cultures, which improves staff morale, increases engagement and satisfaction, and elevates performance. Currently, there's a significant underinvestment in the nonprofit workforce. According to Fund the People's analysis of Foundation Center data, 1% of foundation grant dollars supports nonprofit talent development. Given the vital role that nonprofit professionals have in delivering much-needed programs and services and advocating for social movements, a higher level investment is needed to support this workforce. And one aspect of investing in talent that is vital for the nonprofit sector to improve in is equity and inclusion. Although the U.S. has become more racially and ethnically diverse, only 16% of people of color hold leadership positions in the nonprofit sector. In Building Movement Project's Race to Lead report, 50% of people of color surveyed express that they want to become nonprofit CEOs compared to 40% of their white peers. Investing in nonprofit staff helps to harness diversity by advancing equity and inclusion for people of color and other diverse groups at the leadership level and across nonprofits. So this diagram depicts the different levels at which funders can support nonprofit talent. And you'll see that the levels are organized from the individual staff to the entire nonprofit workforce. We urge funders to think beyond the common approach of investing in individuals and to instead take a more holistic approach to funding talent investment across nonprofits. Once a funder decides the level of intervention at which they want to support nonprofit people and organizations, they can determine where on the talent investment menu they'd like to direct their funding. So as you can see in this chart, that can include professional development, leadership development, compensation and personnel policies, all the way up to organizational culture. In today's webinar, we'll hear from our colleagues at the Kresge Foundation, Community Wealth Partners, and CDAD about their approach to supporting nonprofit talent. So now we'll launch our first audience poll to get a better understanding of our audience's current investments to support the staff development of your grantee partners and organizations. So the question is, what percentage of your grant dollars would you estimate are deployed to support staff development and grantee organizations? So if you can take a few moments now to register your answer. If we can hear from just a few more people, just to get a better sense of how what percentage of your dollars are supporting nonprofit talent. Don't be shy. Okay, I'll give it a couple more seconds. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so you can see that about 56% of our audience spends about 2 to 5% to support staff development and grantee organizations, which is better than the 1% that we reported earlier from the Foundation Center data. So thank you for responding to the poll. So now I'm happy to introduce my co-presenters that will share their experiences with talent investing. You can find the detailed presenter bios in your Ready Talk webinar invitation. So first you'll hear from Nisha Modi, the Detroit Program Officer at the Kresge Foundation. Then we'll hear from Isabel Moses, Director of Community Wealth Partners. And then we'll hear from Sarita Scott, Executive Director at CDAD. And now I'd like to turn it over to Nisha.
Thanks, Yolanda. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So it's great to be with everyone this afternoon, and I'm thrilled to be able to share a little bit more about the Kresge Foundation and our investments in the talent and leadership space for our grantees. So I thought I'd start with just a little bit about the foundation. So the Kresge Foundation, our mission is to expand opportunities in American cities. The foundation was established in the early 1920s by Sebastian Kresge, founder of the SS Kresge Company. Today, we are over a $3.6 billion endowed foundation. So we award around $160, $180 million in grants annually across the United States, and we do that through 6 program areas and 2 practices. So those 6 program areas are environment, arts and culture, health, human services, education, and then we have a place-based team in Detroit, which is our hometown, and we invest our largest grant dollars into the city of Detroit and have been for many years. And I am a program officer on our Detroit team in addition to working across our leadership development investments along with my colleagues across the foundation. Additionally, we're very lucky to be able to support investments in expanding opportunity in American cities through our 2 practice areas. The American Cities practice area was born out of the work we've been doing in Detroit and really taking a lot of those on-the-ground place-based community development strategies to other places. And so we most notably work in Memphis and New Orleans. And then recently we've been able to couple our grant dollars with a large investment through our social investments practice. So we're able to couple grant dollars with things like program-related investments, and other alternative forms of capital that really help us move our collective work forward. So it was really important for us to invest across our foundation's portfolio areas, specifically in leadership development, for a lot of the reasons that Yolanda lifted up, and our foundation recognized the criticality of that. And so what we did was we actually, before designing the program, surveyed and spoke with a number of our grantees to really understand what their talent and leadership development challenges are that they face. And through that, we were really able to have a better sense of what the needs were, but also were able to do a scan of organizations that were providing services that would potentially meet our grantee needs. And through all of that, developed and launched a program, which I'll talk about here in a second. But before I do that, I think one of the things I really wanted to lift up is part of the design, which was incredibly thoughtful, intentional design on the front end, was to design the program to address our urban opportunity framework, which is really to advance how our programs might make a meaningful contribution to community development in the leadership development space. And so that was around 4 areas. So of course we wanted to design a program with a focus on cities and urban opportunities to support our mission. We also wanted to design the effort to work across sector and across disciplines. As I mentioned, the foundation works across various issue areas nationally, but then within place we also work at cross-sector within place. And it was also important for us to deploy a wide range of philanthropic tools for our grantees. So how do we provide opportunities that meet all of our grantees kind of where their acumen is? We wanted to make sure that the impact was, that there was an emphasis on a diverse participation with an equity frame, and we'll talk more about that here in a minute, but that there was both impact at the individual and organizational levels. And so it was important for us to really think about a cross-cutting program that focused on a networked and interdisciplinary leadership program. And with that, so the program itself, we launched in 2017 to help meet our grantees' talent and leadership development needs. The goals for the program you can see here really align around what we heard from our grantees through the survey. And so what they were asking us was for investments to help them build stronger senior teams, stronger mid-level staff, help them address and build a more diverse talent, and build stronger, more equitable organizations. And so in the short term, it's really about helping our grantees become more diverse and connected and effective at creating impact in their communities. And of course, in the long term, we want to see improved results in our communities because our grantees have a greater ability to tackle the complex problems that we face today. We also wanted an additional sort of programmatic field level goal. So we wanted to, through these investments, strengthen the field of equity-informed talent and leadership development service providers. So in addition to actually helping our grantees access leadership development supports, we wanted to build up the field of those organizations that provide them. And I'll speak to that a little bit more here in a minute. So the program itself, the pilot program, we took the information we learned and we built the program, and you'll see the 6 service providers here and how they line up against the 4 goals that I outlined. But we selected these 6 service providers because we believed they had best-in-class leadership and organizational development training and consulting services for the social sector. Each of the providers heavily integrated a race and equity lens into their offerings with the goal of helping grantees improve their ability to pursue equity-minded talent and leadership development within their organizations and within themselves. Through the pilot program, we had approximately 120 grantee organizations and close to 300 individuals participate. And overall, our foundation invested close to $1.3 million in the pilot program. And that included the investments to our service providers. So as I mentioned earlier, in addition to providing grants to our service providers for the actual services to our grantees, and that ranged anywhere from $125,000 to $175,000, we also offered $25,000 in unrestricted support for each of our service providers so that they could strengthen their own talent and leadership development efforts of an organization. And then additionally, we built in travel subsidies for organizations participating in any cohort-based experiences. So several of these listed on this slide are actually cohort-based experiences. And we provided a range of service offerings that were kind of one-off, less intense to more intense cohort-based experiences so that each of our grantees could sort of self-select into meeting their own individual personal or organizational needs. And so for those more in-depth experiences, we wanted to make sure that we offered travel subsidies for organizations that were participating. And then lastly, we worked with a fantastic organization, Community Wealth Partners, who really provided us with that program management expertise in helping us to organize all of this work, helping us to issue our initial call for service providers, and honestly doing a lot of helping our program officers really with that matchmaking that had to happen. And since this was a pilot program, you can imagine that there was a lot of learnings along the way. And so having a partner who could help us sort of step back and see that and iterate along the way was really important. And so lastly, I just wanted to share a little bit of how this relates to our work in Detroit. I know you'll hear from one of our fantastic grantees, Sarita and CDAD, but our investments in place are really critical because we do invest at a little bit of a deeper level. In Detroit, we're providing annually around $30 million in grant funding to promote and expand long-term equitable opportunity. And in Detroit, we work across issue areas. And so this work landed in Detroit along with our national portfolios as well. And we see the impact here on the ground to be exceptionally high simply because we have to be nimble and flexible when we work with our grantees in place. You're working within a unique set of place-based assets and constraints. So having this kind of additional funding that can be flexible, nimble, and again, meet our grantees where their acumen is really critical. So with that, I'll pass it over to our partner, Isabel at Community Wealth Partners.
Thank you so much, Nisha. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Wonderful. So hi, everyone. I'm Isabel Moses, the Director with Community Wealth Partners. I'm excited to share more with you about the program that we co-created with Kresge and Kresge's grantees, and also with our service provider partners. This was a really thoughtfully and very deeply co-creative process to come up with the program that we ultimately launched in early 2017. So just to share a little bit more about who we are a social sector consulting firm based in Washington, D.C., and we've just celebrated our 20-year anniversary late last year, and our mission is to partner with social change agents to solve problems at the magnitude they exist. About 60% of our work is with foundations and about 40% with nonprofits. And we have really three main areas of work. One is, such as you see in this conversation, around our partnership around strategic capacity building with foundations and grantees. We also support around strategy, design, and implementation, and performance measurement and evaluation are the main areas that we work in. So Anisha shared about our program goals, which are, just to reiterate, stronger senior teams, stronger mid-level staff, more diverse talent, and more equitable organizations. And this is a theory of change that we developed with Kresge to more clearly articulate what success would look like through the program. And I just want to say that so as we began this design process nearly 2 years ago, we really wanted to think about, based on what grantees said they were interested in, how could we match them with service providers who had those same interests in their toolkit. And again, we wanted to really emphasize an equity lens in addition to diversity framing. And then we provided the support to do that matchmaking across grantees and service providers to make sure that there was really strong fit between who needed what and who offered what. And so I'll come back a little bit more to our learnings, but this was a framework that we would come back to again and again to make sure that what we were doing was on the right track. And so it's just to say a little bit more about the assessment process. We did a two-tier assessment process. First, we did a survey of about 50 grantee organizations that enabled us to really get a slice of I think Kresge has more than 1,000 grantees, so it was really a slice, a representative sample, and went deeper in conversations with about 10 of those to better understand how to interpret what we learned in the survey data. So that gave us really good insight around what kinds of services would be of greatest interest. And I just want to respond to the question that came up in the Q&A about early career talent development pipelines. And I think what we see actually is that there is already a huge amount of diverse talent in nonprofits already. And so what we saw is that it was really less about the pipeline and more about how do we support nonprofits who already have really strong talent in their organizations to retain, advance, and support folks as they move into stronger leadership roles. And then another component of that is how do we support organizations to shift their cultures so that their cultures are better able to honor the different talents that folks of color might bring into organizations that may have had challenges in churning staff of color, as an example. So how to support retention and fostering organizations that really honor all the diversity that people bring into a space. So that's just a quick response to that point, since kind of relevant to our assessment process. And I'll speak a little bit more to some of the outcomes. So when we, now that we're really towards the end of our first program year, which was about an 18-month timeline, we're really excited that grantees had a phenomenal experience overall. And so here you see some of the quotes that highlight what people were able to learn and the excitement that they gained through the program. So what we learned is about 87% of participants were mostly or completely satisfied, which was really exciting for us. That was, I think, a good measure of success. We also learned about the ways in which they were able to experience the program outcomes. So again, these are early, so a little bit more work to really understand how this manifests over time, but folks were able to strengthen their boards, really understand how to master general management practices, modeling equity within their organizations, effectively recruiting and hiring diverse talent, as well as thinking about, again, at that more cultural level, how to better understand how racism shows up and how to promote greater equity within organizational culture. And as Anisha said, it was really important that this program foster support for the field of service providers, and the service providers were really emphasizing how to strengthen their practices around equity. So some of them had more experience in equity, and others this was more of a learning edge. And so this was an opportunity for providers to deepen their ability to support participants around equity as participants were deepening their skills around equity. So this was really an important opportunity for us to learn at a lot of different levels. And in particular, providers were able to support leaders to better understand their role in fostering equity in organizations, to clarify what are reasonable goals and metrics for us to set, and what are the ways that we can strengthen our systems and ways of working. So again, that speaks to the organizational culture elements of the equity equation. And providers also shared back with us the ways in which this program strengthened their own organizations and their practice. So again, they got to experiment with new and different ways of delivering services. They were able to develop new business opportunities. We had a provider cohort, so we have met about quarterly with all of the providers to engage in peer-to-peer conversations, and that was an opportunity for the providers to explore questions of interest to each other. So each conversation really started with, what do we want to talk about today? And we covered questions like, how are we moving organizations along an equity continuum, recognizing that grantees will start at different places and have different needs, and how do we honor different starting points and yet encourage folks to continue to make progress along that journey. And so we had a number of really, really rich dialogues around the practitioner's practice. And then with the $25,000 that they were each awarded to support their own capacity building, they were able to, again, do more professional development in their own organizations, and they were able to share a little bit of what they learned through those experiences. So as program managers, we also learned a lot about what it takes to be a strong intermediary and manage multiple interests. So we were negotiating across grantees, providers, program officers at Kresge's interests, and we learned a number of things that can support us to bring an even stronger intermediary lens forward as we consider launching another round of this program in 2019. And so these are 5 points that really highlight what we learned. And for example, in the instances where conflicts did come up, wanting to really make sure that we created space to hear all voices before determining a judgment and making a decision about how to move that forward. We learned to become really conscious about power dynamics and how, as a representative of the funder, we could hold those power dynamics really thoughtfully and make sure not to privilege one perspective over another, again, before we had all the information. We learned to be really thoughtful about our own intentions and motivations to make sure that we were being as clear as possible about why we wanted to move forward on a particular timeline or at a particular pace, and really hear that feedback if it wasn't working for folks. And so to that 4th point, one of the pieces of feedback we heard early on is that some of our timelines felt really fast and urgent, and could we create more space for people to engage in a process that felt like it respected a lot of different needs across all of our audiences. So that was something that we really took to heart and are thinking about how we can slow things down in the future. And then finally, being as clear and transparent as possible around all of these different interests so that we could support, again, making the best decisions that really honored all these different parties. So as you can imagine, with 120 grantees, 6 service providers, 8 different program areas, it was a lot of different factors to keep in mind. And I think over the 2 years, we learned a lot about how to do that well and got increasingly good at it, and feel really confident about a lot of the lessons that we learned, being able to incorporate them in real time to make the program stronger and stronger as we went along. So as we think about what's next, we are partnering with one of the program areas, the environment program, to actually build out an entirely separate program entirely focused on racial equity. So that design process began in November and will launch coming up pretty soon here in 2018, which is really exciting. So that was one example of the success of this early pilot, was that one of Kresge's program teams decided to go even further just with their grantees. And we are convening program officers, providers, and grantees later this month to have a conversation about what did we all learn and to go deeper around grantee experiences and outcomes from the first program year. So that will include a subset of the participants in the program. And in May, we will actually begin design conversations for the second TLD program year, which we're really excited about. So just to recap, we were really excited that our first pilot year was a really strong success, and we feel that we are on track to see evidence of the early outcomes that we named as part of our theory of change, and we'll continue to emphasize learning and evaluation as part of our work going forward so that we can hold ourselves accountable to the progress that we defined at the outset and to be able to share back with the broader field around our learnings and insights around what it takes to support grantee organizations to be more equipped to advance the outcomes that are really important in their communities through talent and leadership development investments. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Yolanda.
Yolanda, don't forget to hit *7 to unmute your line.
Hello. Hi. Here I am.
Great. Great.
All right,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabel, for sharing the journey that you've gone through at Community Wealth Partners in partnership with the Kresge Foundation. So now we just want to take a quick pause to ask for our audience to take our second poll to learn more about how your foundation supports talent investment. So we have a few categories listed here, and if you can check off what the ways in which you support the talent of your grantees, we can get a better sense of the space that you're funding in. So we have leadership development, human resource management, career development, management and supervision, compensation and personnel policies, and then organizational culture. So we'll take a few seconds to have you respond to the poll. And just make sure to check off all that apply. Okay. Okay, so here are our results. So a significant amount of investment in leadership development. And also 50% of you shared that you're supporting, well, about 42% are supporting organizational culture, and then we see where you're supporting human resource management and supervision, which is really critical for nonprofit organizations, and they don't get enough support in, and compensation and personnel. So thank you so much for taking our second poll. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sarita.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm happy to be joining you this afternoon. And I'm going to talk about our experiences and how we have approached talent investment. I am the Executive Director for CDAD, which is the Community Development Advocates of Detroit. We're a membership organization of community development and neighborhood improvement groups. And so our members, we have more than 120 members, and they range in size to what would be considered a large nonprofit organization with more than 100 staff to very small organizations with maybe 1 to 2 staff or sometimes only volunteers. And so this is a topic of great interest to us, particularly to me as the leader of the organization. To start at CDAD, one of the things I first instituted is annual reviews. I think it's an important opportunity for me to talk to everyone about their performance and about their particular job, but also it's the time when I talk with them one-on-one about their own professional and career aspirations. And so this is kind of the beginning of the conversation around talent investment. Not only is it my opportunity to share with them if there are areas of growth, but it's my opportunity to hear from them about the areas where they might like to grow, where they might like to gain some experience or improve their skills. And so that's where the skill building for the position. And so I don't want our talent investment to only be about improving their performance for the position, but I also want it to be linked to their own personal, professional development and their goals for their future. I have what would be considered a relatively young staff, and so I want to be very mindful of the fact that many of them are just beginning in their careers, and so talent investment, professional development is going to be very important. Lastly, I really look at talent investment as a retention tool. And so I'm sure many people are aware that for a nonprofit, funding to support or to invest in professional development is actually very rarely looked at as talent investment. Is hard to come by. Most funders want to support the work. They want to support the programs. They want to support something that provides more tangible results. And so whenever there is an opportunity by a funder to invest in talent, it's greatly appreciated. But it also gives us a little bit of an edge because as a nonprofit, people are looking for that in their careers. People are looking for those opportunities to grow. You can go to other organizations, for-profits where there can be a actual a fund or a pool or a bank that you can utilize. We don't really have that luxury, and so these types of programs are extremely important for us. The process with respect to this particular program was really great. It was an invitation, and as it's been mentioned, we are a Kresge grantee. I am extremely appreciative of the support that we have received from Kresge. But one of the more attractive aspects of this program is that it was an open invitation for the entire team. And so sometimes there is an interest in developing and investing or providing an opportunity for the leader, which is necessary. But it's always good as an executive director to feel that you can offer something to all of your staff. I also appreciated the fact that this was a self-selection process. And so it's kind of fun to be able to give everyone a menu of opportunities and say, think about it, read through them, think about what is interesting to you, think about an area that you've been looking to build on, and then we can apply and we can see what happens from there. And so there's that internal support, but there's just also the opportunity for people to kind of think about what they'd like as opposed to having a very limited options and opportunities. Our experience, and so we had, I'm going to go back here. We had two staff members who were able to attend Managing to Change the World, a training offered by the Management Center. It was very timely, and I, of course, did have the opportunity to review the particular selections that the staff that they were interested in and that they indicated as their preference. And particularly these trainings were good for the staff members who I am thinking about in terms of our succession planning. And so that's always an important aspect and certainly an important need to be able to invest in people who can transition into becoming leaders in the organization. I think it's very important, particularly for small nonprofits. We have just 9 staff to be thinking about a succession plan. And it's something that we are encouraging our members to think about as we recognize in nonprofits quite often you can have the founder of an organization still be there 20 and 30 years. And in Detroit, we have been facing a situation with significant leadership transition within our sector. And so one of the areas that CDAT has been lifting up and doing some work around is succession planning. And so having funds to support that, which has been a need identified by our members, the resources that are sometimes needed for succession planning is really important. And so this training was a great training of cultivating internal leadership, giving people an opportunity to think differently about their work, but I also like the opportunity for people to think of how they are a leader within their own position. So you may not be a manager currently, but there is always an opportunity for leadership, and you may be assuming a leadership role without even recognizing it. With respect to equity and justice, there is a real need for specific investment and engagement on this topic. And so there are a couple of things. Trainings offer an opportunity to reflect on your own organization and to think about how you have or have not addressed these issues. What you see on the screen, and I hope everyone is transitioning with me, are CDAD's core values. And these were developed again, sparked by the ability to attend certain trainings, the ability to think differently about our organization, and that's the kind of thing that we are trying to encourage within all of our members. But one thing that I'm recognizing is that we are currently in a space of a lot of conversation around equity. And as an organization who has established and been very vocal about our commitment to social justice, and recognizing the importance of equity, particularly as we talk about development in a city that's changing as rapidly as Detroit, we're in a moment where equity is actually becoming almost a buzzword. And one of the great things I think about this great opportunity around investment and talent is that it can be used to help organizations, to help leaders think about how to move from the words to action. And so one of the things we've been thinking a lot about is how, if we are saying that we have a commitment to equity, what does that mean in terms of our own hiring processes, our own hiring practices, our own internal processes, our HR practices? How do we actually emulate that in the way that we work with members, in the way that we take positions on issues? And I don't think there aren't a lot of opportunities for organizations to do that, let alone the resources. And so it's been exciting to see investment in these types of trainings and opportunities and information that can help organizations kind of move the needle on this issue so that it isn't just a word, so that we are actually working to achieve this goal of, equitable and inclusive society and development processes and other activities within our city. With respect to any, it's interesting, guidance that I can provide to funders, or I will say my recommendation would be to, again, think about how you can continue to support your grantees and their efforts to invest in talent, or actually, for some of them, how you can expose them to it. And so I am always a strong advocate around recognizing the need to kind of change the nonprofit sector, the way that we think about the work, the way that we think about the staffing. I have always said that I value the expertise that my staff, that they bring to this work, and I also want to recognize that they could be doing this work and being paid much more in other places. And so talent investment is just one great way that I can help to say to them that I appreciate and value you, and also that I want to help cultivate you as you, kind of are on this career path. And I think that would be a great thing for funders to remember, is that it is challenging for us to have the ability and the opportunity to do that. And so when you make these types of funds and programs available, not only is it greatly appreciated, but they also have great impact. and I will take questions when we get to that point. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to Nisha, Isabel, and Sarita. And what we'd like to do now is go ahead and respond to some of the questions that have been placed in the Q&A box, and remind folks that they can go ahead and type a question in that box, or hit the raised hand button, and we will call on you, and I'll unmute your line so that you can ask a question if you'd like. So I'd like to start out by asking a question for Nisha. Nisha, what was an unanticipated roadblock you encountered along the way with the program?
That's a great question. I mean, we had a lot of lessons learned along the way, many of which we had the ability in the design and execution of the program to actually address. So, for example, we experienced a high level of demand for one of our service providers, and we were actually able to build that into the program design, recognizing that we didn't know where our grantees were going to see the most value for themselves, and so being able to sort of address that. So there are some things we sort of, and you're asking for roadblocks we couldn't see. Those were some that maybe we had designed for. Some of the other ones I think are just kind of learnings around how do we make sure, I would say like that power dynamic one that Isabel lifted up, as well as ensuring that the voices of all of our grantees were heard in a really safe way, was I think one we recognized would happen, but always continues to surprise me. We have such great relationships with our grantees. At least here in Detroit, we have a different relationship with our grantees because we work with them more on the ground. But at the end of the day, recognizing that power dynamic is really important. And so understanding for some of these experiences too, when was a good time for any of our program officers to sort of be a part of it and be a part of the conversation, and when we're, and frankly it was most of the time, we had to step back and let our grantees work with one another and work with CWP. And frankly, the role that CWP really played in offering that little bit, that kind of unbiased sort of intermediary role, was really critical.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that, Nisha. And for any of you, as we think about this, how can a funder with modest resources get started in supporting the talent development of their grantees? What's a good way for a smaller foundation to put their toes in the water here? Any thoughts on that?
I actually have a comment. Hello?
Yes,
although I'm not a funder.
You're right.
I would say one of the things that had a real impact on us that a funder did that I think was pretty cost effective is they did a survey of grantees to find out the commonality around the interests and the needs that we had in terms of talent investment or professional development, and they held one large training around communications, and it was excellent.
Yeah, I would second that kind of thinking about providing a training for your grantees writ large around sort of a common element that they are all looking for resources to build their skill levels. And we as a funder, I funded a lot of how to tell your story kinds of webinars. I funded projects on just doing grant writing workshops, as well as just providing actually networking for peer communities within my grantees to enable them to get to know each other outside of a competitive area, but as colleagues and developing a professional network. So any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is Yolanda. My suggestion.
Oh, Yolanda, I think we lost your voice there. You may have gone back off mute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so one suggestion for funders to, as Maggie, you put it, dip a toe in the water here on talent investing is to simply start asking the question about what could be helpful or useful to a nonprofit to help support their talent development needs. And that could be a question that a funder asks directly to the grantees or includes in a grant application or even a letter of inquiry, just to get that conversation started and build on what you're learning, and that can help inform how a funder helps to support their grantees' talent needs.
Absolutely. It also, when you do that and add that to perhaps your application, it brings it to another level of consciousness with the board of directors, who's typically approving a budget that will or will not have professional development line items in them, and to be able to for the board, to help the board think about why that's an important and necessary part of their budgetary investment every year. So great pieces to help that along. So here's go ahead, Isabel.
I was just going to offer one other idea for smaller foundations, is to potentially think about who are other similar foundations in either your issue area or your geography that you might collaborate with. We've supported funder collaborations around these kinds of investments. So whereas CUSD is able to fund this entirely with its own budget, other foundations sometimes partner, 3 or 4, kind of come together to pool resources in order to make something bigger possible collectively versus what you can do just with one foundation's resources. So just offer that as another possibility.
Great. I appreciate that. And Nisha, there's a question asking, how are Kresge staff involved across the Foundation's departments?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, our foundation has 6 program areas and 2 practice areas. And so we have an internal group known as our Leadership and Infrastructure team, and it's represented by 1 program officer from each of those areas. And so it's kind of a second hat that we wear. So I'm a program officer on our Detroit team, but I also represent Detroit on our Leadership and Infrastructure team. And so we have representation across our program areas, and that team is the group that sort of came together to collaborate and conceptualize and eventually work with community wealth partners to develop and design this program. We also, across our program officers, hold relationships with various service providers as part of this, as well as served as the point person for each of our teams to bring back the program to our program, to bring back this initiative to our program teams as we looked to pilot it with a subset of grantees, because the grantees are, again, across all of those areas. And so the program officers sort of had that role and really that interface between this initiative and all of our programmatic staff.
Great. And how are grantees identified to be part of the program?
So this was a pilot program, so unfortunately we weren't able to offer it to all of our grantees, and so we asked our program officers that were sort of representative we developed a set of just high-level criteria around sort of what the service needs were that we were hearing from our grantees, as well as their understanding of the grantees' organizations themselves and sort of what their needs were, and asked them to select a subset of their grantees to lift up for kind of matching an application into the program. So it's a little bit more art than science, I would say, this time around. I know Isabel can probably share a little bit more sort of on the actual matching process itself, because we did have quite a bit that happened there in that matching process to help ensure that our grantees really were able to access the services they needed.
And when you think about your CEO and the board of trustees, how were they interested? What was their interest and engagement level in this kind of work for the foundation?
Yeah, so this program actually conceptually went up to our CEO as well as was presented to our board before we moved forward with it. So there was engagement, feedback, and awareness kind of at all of those levels, as well as we'll be going back to our board later this year to sort of share the outputs of this pilot program and discuss sort of the next iterations of it and how we're going to be moving forward with the work.
Great. And one question comes from Monina Fabria about what advice could you give not-for-profit organizations who hesitate to request additional funding in their applications for fear that they will not receive the project funding at all, or that it will be cannibalized if they put some request towards this work?
I mean, I'd love to hear, Sarita, from a grantee perspective, your advice, but I'll start with, as a funder, I think it's our responsibility to recognize that power dynamic, and if we're serious about these investments, it's up to us to actually make that ask first and provide the transparency about what that information will or will not influence. And so, in our even Detroit grantee applications in some of our cohorts, we're starting to ask that question. It's the same thing that was suggested earlier in this webinar. What are your talent and leadership development needs? What are your capacity building needs? This is just helpful information for us to use and understand. It won't influence any decisions, but we've been able to see some powerful things with that. And grantees can decide, if or how they want to respond to that question. But I think it's important for funders to recognize that we have the ability to move the needle on this and actually encourage our nonprofit organizations in the social sector writ large to be asking about this.
Right. Great. Sarita, any last thoughts on that?
Yes. I would recommend, if it's project funding that you're seeking, that you try to connect the training, the professional investment, the development to the particular project so that it is understood how supporting staff, investing in staff will actually increase your impact. I've also found that it's been much easier to get support for talent investment from those funders who have already invested in us with general operating support. And so once we get to that relationship, and all of my initial grants here started, our grant relations, our funding relations all started as project-based, and then some of them have moved to general operating support. And so there's been a relationship built and more of an understanding from the funder and support for the organization. And so they recognize, and it's easier for me to have the conversation about how some funding or assistance, the ability to invest in our staff will really overall boost our organization. I like to always share with people that I've hired everyone that's been here since I've been here 5.5 years. We haven't had one staff person leave. I think it does speak to the fact that they feel that this is a supportive, nurturing environment, which is what I'm working to create. And so this type of investment is really key to that.
Great. Thanks so much. And now I will turn it over to Yolanda to work on next steps.
Yes, thank you. In order to help you continue your learning of talent investing, we encourage you to check out Fund the People's Toolkit, and you see the website here to help you learn about ideas, data, practices, and also practical guidance to work within your foundations to support talent investing and also to work to support your grantee partners. After today's webinar, the forum will share some additional resources from our presenters to help you get started or deepen your talent investing. So you can follow Fund the People on all our social media channels listed here. This is just a snapshot of Fund the People's coming work for 2018. We hope to see some of you on our call at the GEO conference. Fund the People will have a few events happening in San Francisco at that event. We have a few projects coming out soon that focus on equity and inclusion, and also how that intersects with talent investing, and also the value of talent investing and data that we're learning about that we want to share with the field. And with anybody has follow-up questions from today's presentation, here's our contact information, our email addresses. We hope to hear from you, and we are very appreciative of your time today in joining us on this webinar. And thank you to the forum for their partnership in helping us get this information out.
Thank you. Thanks to all of our presenters and to our member partner, Fund the People. This recorded webinar will be available on the forum website by Thursday at the latest, and that is the address for it. And as soon as we close this out, a survey will pop up for you following this slide, and we really appreciate your feedback. It'll help make our work better and make Fund the People's work better. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.